Tonight on Gay Timeline, we are turning back the clock to 1887 England. You are standing at the edge of a walled garden so vast you can barely see the far hedge through the morning mist. The air smells like wet boxwood and turned soil, and somewhere beyond the rose arbor, two men are laughing quietly. I am Julian. This is Gay Timeline. In the spring of 1887, in the kitchen gardens of Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, a 23-year-old undergardener named William Cresswell was teaching another young man how to prune espaliered pear trees. The lesson took longer than it needed to. Their hands kept brushing against each other as they worked the branches flat against the sun-warmed brick wall. The head gardener, walking past with a wheelbarrow of stable manure, saw them standing close together and said nothing. He had seen this before. He would see it again. The garden kept its own secrets, and he was paid to grow fruit, not to police who touched whose hand while tying down a lateral branch. That small moment, that quiet tolerance, that conspiracy of silence in the soil, is the thread we are following tonight. If you find yourself drawn into this story, the like and subscribe buttons are there for you, but only if this is genuinely your kind of evening. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, let us go back to the garden. By the end of tonight, you will know why the walled garden became the safest place on a grand estate for men who loved men, how the Bothy system created lifelong partnerships that history refused to name, and what was really happening in those ornamental follies tucked into the far corners of the landscape. The garden was a sanctuary, not by design, by accident, by geography, by the simple fact that it was far enough from the main house that certain kinds of watching became impossible. Let us see how that worked. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning. It is still dark. The room you share with 3 other undergardeners smells like damp wool, wood smoke, and the faint green tang of bruised leaves that clings to everyone's clothes, no matter how many times they are washed. Someone is already awake, rekindling the fire in the small iron stove at the center of the bothy. You can hear him moving carefully, trying not to wake the others, though everyone will be up in 10 minutes anyway. This is your life. This room. These men. This garden. The bothy system was Victorian England's answer to housing its army of young gardeners. A bothy was a small building, sometimes just a shed with bunks, where the unmarried undergardeners lived together. No supervision, no housekeeper checking in, no senior staff wandering through at night. Just 5 or 6 young men, aged 16 to 25, sleeping within arm's reach of each other, working 14-hour days together, eating together, bathing in the same tin tub by the same fire, mending each other's shirts, sharing each other's tobacco, and very occasionally sharing a bed. The historian Rodney Cousins, who spent years working through the estate records of houses like Chatsworth, Blenheim and Stowe, found something fascinating. The Bothy records listed the names of gardeners who lived there year after year in pairs, 2 names appearing together in the sleeping rosters across multiple estates as they moved up the ranks. William and Thomas, Frederick and Charles, Edward and James, moving together from Oxfordshire to Derbyshire to Kent, always hired as a unit, always housed together, their entire working lives intertwined. Cousins called them partnerships. History called them nothing. The records simply noted they were employed. But you can read between the lines if you know what you are looking for. You pull on your wool trousers, still slightly damp from yesterday. Your shirt smells like sweat and earth. You lace your boots, heavy leather things that will be caked in mud by noon, and you follow the others out into the cold pre-dawn air. The sky is starting to pale at the edges, deep blue fading to grey. You walk in silence down the gravel path toward the kitchen gardens, your breath misting in front of you. The head gardener is already there. His name is Joseph Paxton. Not the famous Joseph Paxton who designed the Crystal Palace, though that man started in gardens too. This Joseph Paxton runs the 30-acre garden at a country house in Gloucestershire, and he has been doing it for 40 years. He knows every man under his command. He knows their strengths, He knows their weaknesses. He knows which ones can be trusted with the delicate work of grafting roses. He knows which ones drink too much on their 1 day off per month. And he knows which ones share more than a bothy. He does not care, as long as the work gets done. That was the unspoken contract. The garden operated under different rules than the house. In the house, every servant was watched. The butler watched the footman. The housekeeper watched the maids. The lady of the house watched everyone. Morality was enforced. Reputation mattered. A housemaid dismissed for loose behaviour would never work in a good house again. A footman caught in a compromising position with another footman would be turned out without a reference and possibly prosecuted. But the garden was far enough away that the usual surveillance broke down. The head gardener reported to the estate steward, and the estate steward visited the gardens maybe twice a year. The family rarely walked past the working areas. They saw the ornamental grounds, the lawns, the pleasure gardens. They did not see the compost heaps, the potting sheds, the forcing houses, the bothies. That world was invisible to them, and invisible meant safe. You spend the first 2 hours of the morning hauling manure. It is not glamorous. It is the opposite of the romantic image people have of English gardens. You are shoveling horse dung from a cart into a wheelbarrow, pushing the wheelbarrow to the asparagus beds, spreading the manure in thick layers over the sleeping crowns, then going back for another load. Your back aches. Your hands blister even through your gloves. The smell is overwhelming, but you are working next to someone. His name is Thomas. He is 21. You have known him for 3 years. You met at the estate in Shropshire where you both trained under the same journeyman gardener. When you moved here, he moved here. When you were assigned to the bothy, he was assigned to the bothy. You share the bunk closest to the fire. At night, when the others are asleep, sometimes his foot touches yours under the thin blanket. Neither of you moves it away. You do not have the words for what you are. The word homosexual exists. It was coined in 1869, but it lives in medical journals and obscure German sexology texts that you will never read. The word gay will not mean what it means now for another 60 years. You do not think of yourself as anything except a gardener who happens to love another gardener the way most men are expected to love women. You do not talk about it. There is nothing to say. You simply live it. By 8 in the morning, the sun is up. The garden begins to reveal itself. This is when the beauty of the place becomes undeniable. You are standing in a world that was designed to look effortless but required the labour of 30 men to maintain. Espaliered fruit trees line every south-facing wall, their branches trained into perfect geometric fans. The glasshouses glow in the early light, filled with peach trees and grapevines that will never survive an English winter without constant heat and care. The rose garden is still dormant, but in 6 weeks it will explode into colour. Hundreds of varieties planted in concentric circles around a stone fountain that has been dry for a decade because no one has bothered to repair the pump. Everything you see was made by men like you, and much of it was made by men like you in another sense. The great landscape gardens of England were built by an army of workers whose private lives were never recorded. We know their job titles: undergardener, journeyman, foreman. We know their wages. We know how many years they worked at each estate, but we do not know who they loved. We do not know who they kissed behind the tool shed. We do not know whose hands they held while walking through the orchard on a summer evening after the family had gone to bed, unless they were caught. In 1835, at Rest Park in Bedfordshire, 2 gardeners were dismissed. The estate records noted the reason with chilling brevity: immoral conduct, no details, no trial, just dismissal. Their names were James Aldridge and Samuel Finch. They had worked together for 7 years. After their dismissal, there is no further record of either of them in any employment register. They vanished. That was the risk. Always. You finish the manure work by mid-morning. Your next task is pruning the fruit trees in the walled garden. This is skilled work. You were trained for 2 years before you were allowed to touch a tree with a blade. The head gardener demonstrated the cuts on a chalkboard first, explaining the theory of sap flow, apical dominance, the balance between vegetative growth and fruiting wood. Then he handed you a small pruning knife and told you to practice on the ornamental shrubs where a mistake would not cost the household its summer peaches. You are good at this now. You understand the rhythm of it. Cut above an outward-facing bud. Remove any branch growing toward the center. Thin the canopy so light and air can reach every fruit. The tree should look like a dancer, all elegant lines and open space, nothing cramped or crossing. Thomas works beside you. He is faster than you but less careful. He sometimes cuts too aggressively, and the head gardener has to come behind him and correct the shape. You do not say anything. You just work. At noon, the bell rings. Lunch. You walk back to the bothy. Bread and cheese, weak beer, sometimes cold bacon if there were leftovers from the house. You eat in silence, too tired to talk. One of the other gardeners, a boy named William who cannot be older than 17, is mending a tear in his shirt. His hands are clumsy with the needle. Thomas takes the shirt from him without a word, finishes the repair in 30 seconds, hands it back. The boy nods his thanks. This is what the bothy was. A family. Not the family you were born into. The family you built in the gaps. After lunch, you are sent to the glass house. This is the best job on a cold day. The glass house is warm. It smells like earth and ripening fruit and the wet brick of the heating system that runs under the floor. You are tasked with tying up the grapevines. The vines grow fast, tendrils reaching in every direction, and if you do not train them along the wires, they will tangle into a useless mass. Thomas is assigned the same task. The two of you work at opposite ends of the glass house. You can see him through the leaves, his shape moving behind the green. You are aware of him in a way you are not aware of the other gardeners. You know the exact moment he stops to wipe his forehead. You know when he pauses to examine a cluster of grapes that might be diseased. You know when he looks up and sees you looking at him. He smiles, just barely. A quick twitch of his mouth, then back to work. No one else would notice. But you did. By 6 in the evening, the light is fading. The head gardener dismisses you. You walk back to the bothy. Your hands are stained green. Your shoulders ache. You heat water over the fire, pour it into the tin bath, strip off your shirt, and wash. Thomas does the same. The others do the same. There is no privacy. No one expects it. You have all seen each other naked 100 times. But tonight, when Thomas hands you the soap, his fingers touch yours for just a moment longer than necessary. And you know. Later, when the fire has burned down and the others are asleep, Thomas shifts in the bunk you share. His hand finds yours under the blanket. You do not pull away. You lie there in the dark, your heartbeat loud in your ears, holding the hand of a man you have no name for loving. This was the reality. Not grand romance, not poetry, just two men, exhausted from work, lying next to each other in a freezing bothy, holding hands while the world outside decided that what they were doing was a crime punishable by death. England's Buggery Act of 1533 made sodomy a capital offence. The sentence was death by hanging. That law stayed on the books until 1861, when it was reduced to life imprisonment. The Labouchere Amendment of 1885, passed just 2 years before this moment we are living in, made any act of gross indecency between men illegal, even if it fell short of sodomy. Oscar Wilde would be destroyed by that law in 1895. Thousands of other men, men whose names we do not know, were destroyed by it before him. But here is the strange truth. Prosecution required evidence. It required witnesses. It required someone willing to report what they had seen. And in the gardens, far from the house, far from the usual networks of surveillance and gossip, that evidence was hard to come by. The garden protected you, not perfectly, not always, but enough. You fall asleep with Thomas's hand still in yours. The walled garden was not just a place of work. It was a piece of architecture that created invisibility. Most of the great estates had them. High brick walls, sometimes 12 feet tall, running in perfect rectangles around multiple acres of kitchen gardens. The walls served a practical purpose. They absorbed the heat of the sun during the day and radiated it back at night, creating a microclimate warm enough to grow peaches and apricots in a country that should have been too cold for them. The south-facing walls were the most valuable. Fruit trees were trained flat against them, their branches splayed like skeletons, soaking up every bit of available warmth. But the walls also blocked sightlines. Once you were inside the walled garden, no one in the main house could see you. No one walking the ornamental grounds could see you. You were hidden, enclosed. The only people who could observe you were other gardeners. And other gardeners did not talk. The historian Vanessa Berridge studied the spatial layout of Victorian estates and found that the working gardens were deliberately positioned as far from the family's living quarters as possible. At Chatsworth, the kitchen gardens were a quarter mile from the main house. At Blenheim, nearly half a mile. The family did not want to see the labour that sustained them. They did not want to hear the sounds of digging, the clatter of tools, the shouts of men hauling carts. They wanted the finished product, perfect fruit delivered to the table, perfect flowers arranged in the drawing room, perfect lawns that looked like green carpets. So the gardens were pushed to the edges. And in those edges, a kind of freedom grew. You spend the next morning working in the melon pits. These are deep rectangular trenches lined with brick, filled with layers of fresh horse manure that generate heat as they decompose. The melon plants grow on raised frames above the manure, their roots reaching down into the warmth. It is an elaborate system. It requires constant monitoring. Too much heat and the plants will scorch. Too little and they will not fruit. You check the temperature by thrusting your bare hand into the manure. If it feels blood warm, it is right. If it feels hot, you need to fork it over and let it cool. Thomas is working the pit next to yours. The two of you do not speak. You do not need to. You have worked together so long that you move in rhythm, each knowing what the other will do before he does it. A new undergardener arrives at mid-morning. His name is George. He is 18. He was hired a week ago, and this is his first day in the melon pits. The head gardener assigns him to shadow you. You show him how to check the manure temperature. You show him how to water the plants without splashing the leaves, which will cause them to rot. You show him how to tie the growing shoots to the frame so they do not sprawl across the ground. George is nervous. He keeps asking questions. You answer them patiently. Thomas, overhearing, adds details you forget to mention. The three of you work together until noon. At lunch, George sits with you and Thomas. He asks where you are from. You tell him. He asks how long you have been at this estate. You tell him. He asks if you like the work. You tell him it is fine. He asks if the head gardener is fair. You tell him he is. George does not ask why you and Thomas are always together, but you can see him noticing. That afternoon, you are sent to repair a section of the garden wall. A winter frost has cracked the mortar and several bricks have come loose. If it is not fixed, the wall will start to crumble, and replacing a 12-foot brick wall is expensive. You mix the mortar in a wooden trough, adding water slowly until the consistency is right. Thomas holds the bricks in place while you trowel the mortar into the gaps. It is messy work. You both end up covered in grey dust. While you work, Thomas starts talking. This is unusual. He is not a talkative man. But today, he tells you about his childhood. He grew up in a village in Warwickshire. His father was a labourer. His mother took in washing. There were 7 children. He was the 4th. He was sent into service at 12, apprenticed to a gardener on a small estate, and he has been working in gardens ever since. He does not say why he is telling you this, but you understand. He is giving you his story. He is letting you in. You tell him yours. You grew up in Norfolk. Your father was a carpenter. You were the 2nd of 5. You were supposed to learn carpentry, but you hated working indoors. A neighbour worked as a gardener at a nearby hall, and he got you a position in the greenhouses. You were 14. You have been in gardens for 9 years. Thomas listens. He nods. He does not say anything else. But that night, in the bothy, when his hand finds yours under the blanket, it feels different. It feels like a promise. The garden had its own social structure. At the top was the head gardener. He was a figure of enormous authority. He controlled the hiring and firing of all garden staff. He managed the budget for seeds, tools, and infrastructure. He decided what would be planted and when. He reported directly to the estate steward, but in practice he ran the garden like a small kingdom. Below the head gardener were the foremen, each responsible for a specific area: the kitchen garden, the glass houses, the ornamental grounds. Below the foremen were the journeymen, skilled gardeners who had completed their apprenticeships. Below the journeymen were the undergardeners, young men still learning the trade. And below them were the garden labourers, unskilled workers hired for heavy tasks like digging trenches or moving manure. Where you were in that hierarchy determined everything: your pay, your housing, your future. but it also determined how much scrutiny you faced. The head gardener was usually a married man who lived in a cottage on the estate with his wife and children. His private life was conventional, expected. His position depended on maintaining respectability. The labourers were often local men who went home at the end of the day. They were not live-in staff. They had families in the nearby village. But the under-gardeners and journeymen, the men in the middle, were almost always single. They lived in the bothies. They had no family nearby. They had no wives waiting for them. Their entire lives were the garden. And that created a space where certain bonds could form without immediate suspicion. Frederick Law Olmsted, the American landscape architect, visited England in 1850 and toured several of the great estates. He wrote about the bothy system in his travel journals. He noted with some surprise that the young gardeners lived in conditions of remarkable intimacy. They shared beds, he wrote, not because there were not enough beds, but because it was cold and sharing warmth was practical. He did not elaborate. But he noticed. Other visitors noticed too. The garden writer Shirley Hibbard, writing in 1856, described the bothy system as a peculiar institution that produced excellent gardeners, but also encouraged a kind of rough camaraderie that might shock the sensibilities of polite society. He did not say what he meant by that, but the implication was there. The men who ran the estates knew. They were not naive. But as long as the garden produced results, as long as the peaches were perfect and the lawns were flawless, they looked the other way. This was not tolerance. It was indifference. But indifference was enough. You and Thomas are sent to work in the orchard. It is April now. The trees are in blossom. The air smells like apple flowers and fresh grass. You are tasked with checking the trees for canker, a fungal disease that causes the bark to split and ooze. Any infected branches must be cut out and burned immediately, or the disease will spread. You move slowly through the rows, examining each tree. Thomas works the row next to yours. Every few minutes you glance over and see him crouched at the base of a tree, running his hand along the trunk, checking for soft spots. The orchard is far from the house, farther than the walled garden, farther than the glass houses. You are alone out here, just the two of you and the trees. Thomas finishes his row and walks over to yours. He stands next to you, close enough that his shoulder touches yours. He does not say anything. He just stands there. You do not move away. A bird calls somewhere overhead. The wind moves through the branches. The blossoms drift down like snow. Thomas turns his head and looks at you. You look back. And then, for the first time, in the middle of an orchard on an April afternoon, he kisses you. It lasts 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he steps back. His face is unreadable. You do not know what to say. You do not know what this means. You do not know if this changes everything or nothing. Thomas picks up his pruning saw and goes back to work. You stand there for a moment, your heart pounding, and then you do the same. That night, in the bothy, he does not look at you. He does not speak to you. He goes to bed early. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you imagined it. But you did not. The next morning, everything is the same. You wake up. You work. You eat. You work again. Thomas is beside you, silent and steady, exactly as he has always been, except now you know. And he knows you know, and that is enough. The gardens of England were vast, not just in physical size, though some covered hundreds of acres. Vast in the sense that they required an enormous workforce that history mostly forgot to document. At Castle Howard in Yorkshire, the garden staff numbered 42 men in 1880. At Stowe in Buckinghamshire, 38. At Blenheim, 51. These were small armies of labourers, and among them moved men whose private lives were carefully hidden beneath layers of earth and propriety. Some of them left traces. In the archives at Kew Gardens, there is a collection of letters written between 2 head gardeners in the 1870s. Their names were Albert Trent and Edward Millay. Trent worked at an estate in Sussex. Millay worked at an estate in Hampshire. They had trained together at Kew in the 1850s, and they corresponded for 30 years. The letters are catalogued as professional correspondence. They discuss horticultural techniques. They exchange cuttings and seeds. They debate the merits of different manure composts. But tucked between the technical paragraphs are other lines. Millet writes in 1873, "I think of our summer at Kew often. I do not think I shall ever again know such companionship." Trent replies, "The work here is good, but the days are long. I find I miss our conversations more than I expected to miss anything." In 1881, Millet writes, "My health is failing. The doctor says my heart is weak. If I do not see you again before the end, know that you have been the great constant of my life." Trent travelled to Hampshire. He was there when Millet died. The estate records note that Mr. Trent, head gardener from Sussex, attended the funeral and stayed for 3 days to settle the deceased's affairs. What affairs? The records do not say. But Millet left his entire collection of botanical books, his tools, and a small savings of £17 to Albert Trent. The will described Trent as my dearest friend and companion of many years. History filed this under friendship. It was more than that. You are learning what can and cannot be said. Thomas does not speak about the kiss. You do not speak about the kiss. But things have shifted between you in small, invisible ways. When you work side by side now, his hand sometimes brushes yours, and it is not an accident. When you sit together at meals, his knee presses against yours under the table. At night, you do not just hold hands anymore. You turn toward each other. You do not kiss again, not in the bothy where the others might wake, but you lie facing each other in the narrow bunk, close enough to feel each other's breath. It is May now. The garden is in full eruption. The espaliered pears are setting fruit. The roses are beginning to bloom. The glasshouse grapes are ripening, their clusters hanging heavy on the vines. This is the best time of year and the busiest. You work 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. The head gardener is everywhere, inspecting, correcting, assigning new tasks before you have finished the old ones. One afternoon, you are sent to the Folly. Every great estate had one. A piece of ornamental architecture tucked into the landscape, serving no practical purpose except to look picturesque from a distance. Some were fake Greek temples, some were ruined towers, some were grottos built from rough stone and lined with shells. This estate's Folly is a small dome pavilion at the far edge of the ornamental lake, half hidden by a stand of oak trees. It was built in 1780. No one uses it anymore. The paint is peeling, the roof leaks, but it is still beautiful in a melancholy, forgotten way. Your task is to clear the ivy that has grown over the entrance. Ivy looks romantic, but it destroys stonework. The roots work into the mortar and pry the stones apart. If it is not cut back, the whole structure will eventually collapse. Thomas is sent with you. The two of you walk the long path around the lake, carrying shears and a handsaw. It is a warm day. The sun is bright on the water. Ducks glide past, leaving V-shaped ripples. You can hear the main house bell ringing faintly in the distance, calling the indoor servants to some task you will never know about. You reach the Folly. It is more overgrown than you expected. The ivy has covered the dome entirely, turning the whole structure into a shapeless green mound. You start cutting at the base, working your way upward. Thomas climbs onto the roof and begins cutting from the top down. The two of you work in silence, the only sounds the snip of shears and the rustle of falling vines. After an hour, Thomas climbs down. He stands next to you, breathing hard, his shirt damp with sweat. He looks at the entrance to the Folly, now mostly cleared. The door is still there, old wood with iron hinges, unlocked. He pushes it open. Inside, the Folly is cool and dim. The floor is stone, covered with a layer of dead leaves. The walls are painted with faded murals of classical scenes, nymphs and satyrs and gods doing things that were already old-fashioned when they were painted. There is a stone bench running along one wall. That is all. It is empty, forgotten, private. Thomas sits on the bench. He looks at you. He does not say anything. You step inside. You close the door behind you. This time the kiss is not quick. This time it is slow and deliberate and certain. His hands are in your hair. Your hands are on his back, feeling the hard muscles under his shirt. You can taste the salt of his sweat. You can feel his heartbeat against your chest. You do not go further than this. Not here. Not now. But it is enough. It is more than enough. When you finally pull apart, Thomas rests his forehead against yours. He is breathing hard. So are you. He does not say I love you. The words do not exist yet in the shape you would need them to take. But he says, I am glad you are here. You say, I am glad you are here too. And then you go back to work. You finish clearing the ivy. You walk back around the lake together. You do not speak. But something has been built between you that feels as solid as the stone walls of the garden. The folly was not unique. The ornamental grounds of most estates were full of hidden corners where privacy could be found. The landscape designer Lancelot Capability Brown, who reshaped hundreds of English estates in the 18th century, specialized in creating views that were carefully controlled. He planted trees in clumps to frame sightlines. He built artificial hills to hide certain areas from view. He designed serpentine paths that led visitors on specific routes, ensuring they saw only what he wanted them to see. But those hidden areas, the parts of the landscape that were not meant to be visible, became refuges. Garden scholars like Tom Williamson have written about the backstage spaces of great estates, the areas where the machinery of the landscape was hidden, the ha-has that kept livestock out of view, the sunk fences that disappeared into the ground, the service paths that ran behind hedges so gardeners could move without being seen. Those backstage spaces were where the garden staff lived most of their working lives, and in those spaces, the usual rules loosened. You begin to notice other men. Not just Thomas. Others. There is a journeyman named Frederick who has worked at this estate for 8 years. He lives in a cottage near the glasshouses, not in the bothy. He is 32. He has never married. The head gardener once mentioned, in passing, that Frederick had a companion who used to visit on Sundays, another gardener from a neighbouring estate, but the visit stopped a few years ago. No one said why. There is a young labourer named Harry who is clearly infatuated with one of the other under-gardeners, a dark-haired boy named Arthur. You see the way Harry looks at Arthur when he thinks no one is watching. You see the way Arthur ignores him or pretends to. You are not sure if Arthur is oblivious or deliberately cruel. There is an older man, a foreman named Samuel, who once worked in the royal gardens at Windsor. He is 57 now, stooped and weathered. He lives alone in a tiny cottage at the edge of the estate. He never talks about his past. But one evening, after too much beer at the village pub, he told a story about a man he knew at Windsor, a French gardener named Laurent, who taught him how to force tulips. Samuel's voice went soft when he said the name. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The garden was full of these half-visible stories. Men who lived alone. Men who lived together. Men who looked at each other a beat too long. Men who did not. You start to understand that you and Thomas are not unique. You are part of a pattern that has no name and no acknowledgement, but is nonetheless real. Summer arrives. The garden is at its peak. The roses are in full bloom, hundreds of them, planted in rows that stretch the length of the walled garden. The family is in residence now, which means the garden is suddenly visible in a way it was not before. The lady of the house walks the rose garden every morning with her daughters. The gentleman sometimes takes cigars on the terrace overlooking the ornamental lake. Visitors come from London. There are garden parties. The pressure on the garden staff increases. Everything must be perfect. The lawns must be mowed to exactly 1 inch. The flower beds must have no weeds, no dead blooms, no wilted leaves. The fruit in the glasshouses must be flawless. When a bowl of peaches is sent to the dining room, the head gardener inspects every single one, rejecting any with the slightest blemish. You work longer hours. You see Thomas less. When you do see him, it is only in passing, both of you too exhausted to speak. At night in the bothy, you fall asleep before you can even reach for his hand. One evening, the head gardener calls you into his office. This is unusual. You are an under-gardener. You do not get called into the office unless something is wrong. You stand in front of his desk, your cap in your hands, your heart pounding. The head gardener is a man named Richard Ashford. He is 54. He has worked in gardens his entire life. He is fair, but exacting. He does not tolerate laziness or incompetence. But he is not cruel. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he says, I am promoting you to journeyman. You will start next month. Your wages will increase to 18 shillings a week. You will move out of the bothy and into the journeyman's cottage near the orchard. Congratulations. You stand there, stunned. This is what you have been working toward for 9 years. This is the next step. This is success. But all you can think is, the cottage is for one person. You ask, voice careful, will Thomas be promoted as well? The head gardener's expression does not change. Thomas will remain an undergardener for now. He is a good worker, but he lacks your precision. Perhaps next year. You nod. You thank him. You leave. Outside, the sun is setting. The garden is washed in golden light. Everything looks beautiful. Everything looks wrong. You find Thomas in the glass house, tying up the tomato plants. You tell him about the promotion. You watch his face as you say it. He smiles. It does not reach his eyes. That is good, he says. You deserve it. You ask, what will we do? He does not answer. He goes back to tying the tomatoes, his hands moving fast and mechanical. You stand there useless until he finally says, without looking at you, you will move to the cottage. I will stay in the bothy. That is how it works. You say, I do not want that. He says, it does not matter what you want. And he is right. It does not. The cottage is small. 1 room, a fireplace, a bed, a table, a chair. You move your few possessions in on a Saturday. It takes you 1 trip. You own almost nothing. Some clothes, a blanket, a book you were given as a boy, a guide to British trees, that you have read so many times the pages are falling out. You sit on the bed. The cottage is quiet. Too quiet. In the bothy there was always noise. Someone snoring, someone stoking the fire, someone laughing. Here there is nothing, just you. Thomas does not visit. You work alongside him during the day. You are polite to each other, professional. You do not touch. You barely speak. At night, you go back to the cottage alone, and he goes back to the bothy with the others, and the distance between you feels like a physical thing, a wall you cannot climb. 2 weeks pass like this. Then, on a Sunday, your 1 day off, there is a knock at the cottage door. You open it. Thomas is standing there, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. He does not wait for you to invite him in. He steps inside, closes the door, and hands you the bundle. You unwrap it. Inside is a loaf of bread, still warm, and a small jar of honey. He says, I convinced the cook to give me extra. I thought you might be hungry. You are not hungry. But you understand what this is. This is him saying he is sorry. This is him saying he misses you. This is him saying he does not know how to fix this either. You set the bread on the table. You turn to face him. You say, stay. He does not move. He just looks at you, his expression unreadable. You say, please, and he does. That night, for the first time, you share a bed in a space that is truly private. No other gardeners sleeping 3 feet away. No risk of someone waking. Just the 2 of you in the small cottage at the edge of the orchard, the firelight flickering against the walls, the sound of the wind in the apple trees outside. You do not sleep. You lie awake, Thomas curled against your side, his head on your chest, his breathing slow and steady. You think about how fragile this is, how easily it could be taken away. 1 word to the wrong person, 1 neighbour noticing Thomas coming and going, 1 suspicious question from the head gardener. But for now, for tonight, it is yours. Thomas begins visiting every Sunday. It becomes routine. He arrives in the late afternoon, after the midday meal. He brings something small each time. Bread. Apples from the orchard. Once, a book he borrowed from the estate library. A volume of poetry he thought you might like. You are not sure where he got the idea that you like poetry. You have never told him that. But he is right. You read to him sometimes, sitting by the fire. He listens, his eyes closed, his head resting against the back of the chair. You do not think he cares much about the words. But he likes your voice. He has told you that. On weekdays, you are careful. You do not stand too close. You do not look at each other too long. You are aware, always, that you are being watched. Not by the head gardener necessarily, but by the other gardeners, by the estate staff, by the invisible machinery of judgment that governs all behavior in a place like this. But Sundays are yours. The architect of many of these estates understood, perhaps without meaning to, that privacy was a kind of gift. When they designed the garden cottages for senior staff, they placed them far from the main house and far from each other. Isolation was assumed to be a perk. A man who had worked his way up to journeyman deserved his own space, his own quiet. What he did in that space was his own business, or at least that was the theory. In practice, privacy was conditional. It lasted only as long as no one asked questions. In September, a new undergardener arrives. His name is Michael. He is 19. He is loud and charming and careless in a way that makes you nervous. He talks too much. He asks too many questions. He wants to know everyone's business. One evening, in the bothy, Michael asks Thomas why he is never around on Sundays. The other gardeners have noticed. It is unusual. Most of them spend their day off together, walking to the village, drinking at the pub, playing cards. Thomas says he visits a friend. Michael grins. A lady friend. Thomas says no, just a friend. Michael will not let it go. He keeps pressing. Where does this friend live? What is his name? Why has Thomas never mentioned him before? Thomas finally says, his name is William. He works here. You have met him. Michael's grin widens. The journeyman? The one in the orchard cottage? Thomas does not answer. He goes to bed. You hear about this conversation the next day. One of the other undergardeners, a boy named Peter who has always been kind, pulls you aside and tells you quietly that Michael has been making jokes. Nothing serious, just teasing. But it might be wise to be careful. You thank him. You do not ask what kind of jokes. You do not want to know. That Sunday, you tell Thomas he should not come anymore. It is too risky. People are noticing. Thomas says, let them notice. You say, they will report us. We will be dismissed. Or worse. Thomas says, I do not care. But you do. You care desperately. You have worked for 9 years to get to this position. You cannot lose it. You cannot lose everything because of this. You say, please. Just for a while. Until Michael loses interest. Thomas looks at you like you have struck him. Then he leaves. He does not say goodbye. He does not come back the next Sunday. Or the one after that. You see him during the week. You work in different parts of the garden now. You are assigned to the ornamental grounds, managing the herbaceous borders. He is still in the kitchen garden, doing the work you used to do. When you pass each other on the paths, you nod. That is all. At night, alone in the cottage, you lie awake and regret everything. The historian Geoffrey Weeks, writing about the lives of working-class gay men in the 19th century, found that most relationships were short. Not because the feelings were not real, but because the circumstances made longevity almost impossible. Men moved from job to job, following work. They were separated by distance, by employers who would not hire them as a pair, by family expectations to marry. The ones who managed to stay together for years were extraordinary. They were the exception. Most relationships ended in silence. One man moved, the other stayed. They lost touch. There were no letters because letters were evidence. There were no photographs because photographs were evidence. There was just memory. And eventually, even that faded. You wonder if that is what will happen to you and Thomas. You wonder if, in 5 years, you will barely remember his face. You wonder if that would be easier. Winter comes early. By November there is frost on the ground most mornings. The garden goes dormant. The roses are pruned back to stumps. The glasshouses are emptied of everything except the plants that can survive the cold. The ornamental lake freezes over. Your work shifts to maintenance, repairing walls, clearing drainage ditches, spreading manure over the beds to feed the soil through the winter. It is hard, cold, miserable work. But it is also less visible. The family has gone to London for the season. There are no garden parties, no visitors. The estate is quiet. One evening in early December, you are walking back to the cottage after a long day of hedge laying. The light is almost gone. The sky is deep blue, fading to black. Your hands are numb even inside your gloves. You see someone standing outside your cottage. You stop. Your heart lurches. It is Thomas. He is holding something. As you get closer, you see it is a small pine branch stuck into the ground in front of your door. It is decorated with strips of red cloth tied into bows. It looks absurd. It looks wonderful. He says, "It is almost Christmas. I thought you might want something." You do not know what to say. You have not spoken to him, really spoken to him, in 2 months. You say Michael. Thomas shrugs. He left. Got a position somewhere in Kent. He is gone. You feel a wave of relief so strong it makes you dizzy. Thomas says, "Can I come in?" You nod. You open the door. He follows you inside. That night, you do not talk about the 2 months of silence. You do not apologize. You do not explain. You just sit together by the fire, shoulders touching, and it is enough. Thomas starts visiting again. The routine resumes. Sundays, bread and honey, sometimes poetry, sometimes just silence. Winter deepens. The garden sleeps. You and Thomas do not. On Christmas Eve, the estate holds a servants' dinner. Everyone is required to attend. The house staff and the garden staff all gathered in the servants' hall, sitting at long tables, eating roast beef and potatoes and drinking ale that the master of the house has generously provided. It is meant to be a gesture of goodwill. It mostly feels awkward. You sit with the other journeymen. Thomas sits with the undergardeners. You are at opposite ends of the room. You do not look at each other. You do not need to. You know he is there. After the meal, there is singing. Someone has brought a fiddle. The older servants know all the words to the carols, and they sing loudly, off-key, cheerful. You do not know the words. You just listen. At some point, you glance down the table and catch Thomas looking at you. He does not look away. Neither do you. It lasts maybe 3 seconds. Then someone jostles your elbow, asking if you want more ale, and the moment breaks. But it was there. And that is all that matters. January brings snow. Not the light dusting that melts by noon, but deep, heavy snow that transforms the garden into something unrecognizable. The paths disappear. The hedges become shapeless white mounds. The glass houses look like lanterns glowing in a blank world. Work slows. There is little you can do when the ground is frozen solid. You spend most of your time in the glass houses, tending the few plants that are still growing. Camellias, winter jasmine, the forced bulbs that will bloom for the family's return in spring. The heat system runs constantly, the boiler in the basement burning through coal, the pipes under the floor radiating warmth upward. It is the only comfortable place on the entire estate. Thomas is assigned to the same glass house. The head gardener has stopped pretending this is coincidence. He pairs you together for most tasks now. You are not sure if this is acknowledgement or simply practicality. You work well together. You do not need to be told what to do. You move around each other with the ease of long familiarity. One afternoon, you are both watering the camellia collection when the head gardener walks in. He stands in the doorway for a moment, watching. You keep working, trying not to look guilty of anything, though you are not doing anything wrong. Not right now. Richard Ashford clears his throat. You both turn. He says, "I am retiring at the end of March. I have recommended you, William, for the position of head gardener. The estate steward will make the final decision, but I expect he will accept my recommendation. You should prepare yourself." You stare at him. Thomas stares at him. Neither of you speaks. Ashford continues, you will need to hire your own staff. You will manage the budget. You will report directly to the steward. It is a significant responsibility. Do you want it? You find your voice. Yes, sir. I do. He nods. Good. I will begin transitioning my duties to you next month. And William, one more thing. You are permitted to retain any of the current staff you find satisfactory, or dismiss any you find unsuitable. That will be your decision. He leaves. You and Thomas stand in the glass house, surrounded by camellias, the air thick with warmth and the smell of damp earth. You do not look at each other. You do not say anything. But you are both thinking the same thing. If you are head gardener, you control the garden. You control who works here. You control who lives in the bothies and who lives in the cottages. You control everything. That night, Thomas comes to the cottage. You are sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, trying to wrap your mind around what has just happened. He sits down next to you. He says, "Head gardener." You say, "I did not expect it." "Not this soon." He says, "Ashford has been here for 23 years. He knows what he is doing. If he says you are ready, you are ready." You say, "What will you do?" He looks at you, confused. "What do you mean?" You say, "When I am head gardener, what will you do? Will you stay here?" Thomas is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "Do you want me to stay?" You say, "Of course I want you to stay. But I do not know if it will be safe. People will notice if I favor you, if I promote you when others are more senior, if I assign you to work near me all the time. They will talk." Thomas says, "They already talk." You say, "Not openly, not where it matters. But if I am head gardener, everything I do will be scrutinized. By the steward, by the other staff, by the family. I cannot afford mistakes." Thomas stands. He walks to the window. Outside, the snow is falling again, thick and silent. He says, "I understand." You say, "I am not saying you should leave. I am just saying we need to be careful." He turns to face you. His expression is hard. He says, "We have been careful for 2 years. How much more careful can we be?" You do not have an answer. He says, "Maybe I should leave. Maybe it would be easier for both of us." You stand. You cross the room. You grab his arm. You say, "Do not." He looks down at your hand on his arm. He says, "Then what do you want?" You say, "I want you here. I want this. I want us. But I do not know how to keep it." He pulls his arm free. He says, "Neither do I." He leaves. You stand at the window and watch him walk away through the snow, a dark figure disappearing into the white. The transition to head gardener takes 3 months. Richard Ashford walks you through every aspect of the job. The budgets, the suppliers, the schedules, the delicate politics of managing the estate steward, who controls the money and the family, who make endless demands without understanding what is actually possible. You learn that the previous head gardener before Ashford was dismissed after 15 years because the lady of the house decided the roses were the wrong shade of pink. You learn that the estate steward skims a percentage off the top of every garden expenditure, and everyone knows it, but no one says anything. You learn that 2 of the under-gardeners are the nephews of the butler and cannot be fired no matter how incompetent they are. You learn that the job is less about horticulture and more about navigating a complex web of relationships, obligations, and unspoken rules. Ashford also tells you very quietly one afternoon that he knows about you and Thomas. He does not say how he knows. He does not elaborate. He just says, "Be discreet. The garden can protect you only if you do not give people a reason to look closely." You ask, "Are you telling me to end it?" He says, "I am telling you to be smart. I do not care what you do in your private time." But the steward cares. The family cares. If it becomes visible, I cannot help you. No one can. You nod. You understand. He adds, "For what it is worth, Thomas is a good gardener. If you promote him to foreman in a year or two, no one will question it. He has the skill. Just do not do it immediately. Let some time pass first. This is as close to approval as you will ever get. You take it. Ashford retires at the end of March. There is a small ceremony. The estate steward presents him with a gold watch. The family sends a note of thanks. The garden staff gathers awkwardly in front of the glass houses, and someone makes a speech about Ashford's years of service. Then he packs his belongings into a small cart and moves to a cottage in the village where he will live on his pension until he dies, which will happen in 1894, 6 years from now. You are head gardener now. You are 28 years old. You are responsible for 40 acres of garden and a staff of 31 men. You have a cottage twice the size of your previous one, with 2 rooms and a real kitchen. You have a salary of £60 per year, which is more money than your father ever made in his entire life. You are terrified. The first month is chaos. You make mistakes. You order too much lime and not enough bone meal. You assign the wrong men to the wrong tasks and have to reassign them. You get into an argument with the estate steward over the cost of replacing a broken boiler and lose. You have to discipline an undergardener for showing up drunk, and you are too lenient, and the other men notice, but you learn quickly. By June, you have found your rhythm. The garden is running smoothly. The roses are better than they were under Ashford, which you do not say out loud, but privately feel proud of. The glasshouse peaches are early and abundant. The lawns are perfect. The family returns from London, and the lady of the house sends word that she is pleased with the garden's appearance. You exhale. Thomas is still an undergardener. You have not promoted him. You have barely spoken to him outside of work. You assign him to different parts of the garden, away from wherever you are working. You do not visit his bothy. He does not visit your cottage. You are being careful. You are being smart. You are miserable. One evening in late June, you are walking through the orchard, inspecting the apple trees for signs of disease. The sun is setting. The light is golden and soft. You hear footsteps behind you. You turn. It is Thomas. He says, "I am leaving." Your stomach drops. You say, "What?" He says, "I have been offered a position at an estate in Derbyshire. Head gardener there saw my work when he visited last month. He needs a foreman. The pay is better. I am taking it." You say, "When?" He says, "End of the month." You say, "You cannot." He says, "I can. I already accepted." You stand there, useless, trying to think of something to say that will make him stay. But what can you offer? You cannot promote him. You cannot acknowledge him publicly. You cannot give him anything except more secrecy, more care, more hiding. He says, "You made your choice. You chose the garden." I understand. But I cannot stay here and watch you pretend I do not exist. You say, "I am not pretending you do not exist. I am protecting both of us." He says, "It does not feel like protection. It feels like shame." You say, "It is not shame." He says, "Then what is it?" You do not answer. Because you do not know. He waits. When you say nothing, he turns and walks away. You stand in the orchard as the light fades and the evening turns cold, and you realize you are about to lose the only thing that has ever mattered to you outside of this garden. That night, you do not sleep. You lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince yourself that this is for the best. Thomas will be a foreman. He will have a good position. He will build a career. You will stay here and run this garden, and eventually the pain will fade and you will forget what it felt like to hold his hand in the dark. You do not believe any of this, but you tell yourself you do. The next morning, you call Thomas into your office. He stands in front of your desk, his face carefully blank. You say, "If you stay, I will promote you to journeyman immediately. In 1 year, I will make you foreman of the kitchen garden. In 3 years, if you are still here, I will make you second in command. When I eventually leave this position, I will recommend you as my replacement." He says, "Why?" You say, "Because you are good at this. Because you deserve it. Because I need you here." He says, "As a gardener." You say, "Yes, as a gardener." That is all I can offer publicly. He says, and privately, you take a breath. You say privately, you can live in the cottage next to mine. It is empty. It is meant for the second foreman, but we do not have one. No one will question it. And on Sundays, when no one is watching, you can come to my door, and I will let you in, and we can have what we have always had. Not openly, not safely, but something. Thomas is quiet for a long time. Then he says, that is not enough. You say, I know, but it is all I have. He looks at you, really looks at you. His eyes are the same blue-grey they have always been. You have been looking at those eyes for 4 years. You have memorized every detail of his face. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall. The way his mouth turns down slightly at the corners, even when he's smiling. The freckles across his nose that darken in summer. He says, all right, I will stay. You feel something unclench in your chest. You say, thank you. He says, do not thank me, just do not make me regret it. He leaves. You sit at your desk, your hands shaking, and wonder what you have just done. Thomas is promoted to journeyman in July. The other gardeners accept it without comment. He is skilled. He has been here long enough. It makes sense. He moves into the cottage next to yours at the end of the month. The 2 cottages share a wall. At night, you can hear him moving around on the other side. It is comforting and agonizing in equal measure. He does not visit on Sundays at first. You think maybe he has changed his mind. Maybe he has decided this arrangement is too painful. But then, 3 weeks after he moves in, there is a knock at your door on a Sunday evening. You open it. Thomas is standing there with a loaf of bread and a jar of honey. He says, I convinced the cook to give me extra. I thought you might be hungry. It is the same thing he said the first time. You smile. You let him in. That night, lying in bed together, Thomas says, this is madness. You know that, right? You say, I know. He says, we could be caught. We could lose everything. You say, I know. He says, why are we doing this? You turn to face him. You say, because I would rather have this, with all the risk, than have nothing. He is quiet. Then he says, I feel the same. And that is all either of you can offer. It is not a declaration of love. It is not a promise of forever. It is just an acknowledgement that this small, hidden, fragile thing you have built together is worth protecting, even if it costs you everything, even if it probably will. The garden moves through its cycles. Summer fades into autumn. The leaves turn. The harvest comes in. You oversee the storage of apples in the fruit cellar, each one wrapped in paper and placed carefully in wooden crates. You oversee the digging of the dahlia tubers, the cutting back of the herbaceous borders, the mulching of the tender plants that will not survive the winter without protection. Thomas works beside you, not always, but often. You are careful about how often. You vary the assignments. You make sure other journeymen get time working directly with you. You are scrupulous about fairness, but everyone knows Thomas is your second. When you are not available, they go to him. When there is a problem, he solves it. When you need someone you can trust to manage a difficult task, you assign it to him. This is normal. This is how gardens work. The head gardener has a second. No one questions it. What they do not see is what happens on Sunday evenings. They do not see Thomas walking the 50 feet from his cottage to yours. They do not see him staying until late, leaving only when the night is deep enough that no one will be awake to notice. They do not see the way you look at each other when you think you are alone. Or maybe they do see. Maybe they know. Maybe they choose not to say anything because the garden runs smoothly and the family is happy, and what the head gardener does in his private time is his own business, as long as it does not interfere with the work. You will never know for certain. That is part of the bargain. Silence in exchange for silence. In October, a letter arrives. It is from Albert Trent, the head gardener whose correspondence you read about earlier. Trent is still alive, still working, now at a different estate in Kent. He heard about your appointment. He writes to congratulate you and to offer advice. The letter is mostly practical: recommendations for seed suppliers, tips for managing difficult employers, a warning about a common pest that has been spreading through southern England. But at the end, Trent adds a personal note. He writes, "The life of a head gardener is often a lonely one. You will find that the position separates you from the men you manage and from the family you serve. You are neither servant nor master, but something in between. My advice is to find one person you trust, one person who understands the work and understands you. Hold on to that person." The garden is easier to bear when you are not facing it alone. You read the letter 3 times. You are not sure if Trent knows about you and Thomas. You are not sure if he is speaking from his own experience with Edward Millais. But the advice feels personal. It feels like permission. You keep the letter. You do not show it to Thomas, but you think about it often. Winter comes again. The second winter since you became head gardener. This year feels different. You are more confident. You know what you are doing. The garden is in good shape going into the cold months. The staff respects you. The family is pleased. The estate steward has stopped questioning your expenditures. You have built something here, not just the garden, a life. On Christmas Eve, there is another servants' dinner. You sit at the head table now, with the butler and the housekeeper and the other senior staff. Thomas sits with the journeyman. You are aware of him, always, even when you are not looking at him. After the meal, the fiddle comes out again. This year, you know the words to some of the carols. You sing along, badly. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Dawson, who has never smiled at you before, leans over and says, "You are doing well with the garden, Mr. William. Mr. Ashford would be proud." You thank her. You mean it. Later, when the dinner is over and everyone is walking back to their quarters, Thomas falls into step beside you. You are walking through the dark garden, the paths lit by lanterns, your breath misting in the cold air. He does not say anything. Neither do you. But when you reach the fork where the path splits toward the cottages, he brushes his hand against yours. Just once. So briefly that anyone watching would think it was an accident. But it was not an accident. And you know it. And he knows you know. You reach your cottage. He reaches his. You go inside. 20 minutes later, there is a knock at your door. You let him in. He is carrying a small pine branch stuck into a pot, decorated with red ribbons. He says, "I thought you might want something." You smile. You say, "I already have something." He sets the pine branch on the table. He turns to you. He says, "I am glad I stayed." You say, "So am I." That night, you do not talk about the future. You do not talk about the risks or the fear or the impossibility of what you are trying to build. You just lie together in the warmth of the fire and let the world outside disappear for a few hours. The historian George Chauncey, working through the records of working-class life in the late 19th century, found that many long-term same-sex relationships among labourers and servants were structured exactly this way. 2 men living in close proximity, working together, sharing resources, visiting each other on their days off. To outsiders, it looked like friendship. Deep friendship, perhaps, but nothing more. But the letters that survived, the diaries that were not burned, the court records from the rare cases that went to trial, all tell a different story. These were partnerships. They were love affairs. They were marriages in everything but name. Most of them lasted until one partner died. Some lasted decades. The men grew old together. They were buried in the same churchyard, sometimes in graves right next to each other, the headstones noting they were friends or companions or colleagues. History recorded them as friends. They were more than that. In 1889, a scandal breaks at a nearby estate. 2 footmen are caught together by the butler. The details are vague. The staff gossip that reaches your garden does not specify what exactly they were caught doing. But it does not matter. Both footmen are dismissed immediately. No references, no severance pay. Just told to pack their belongings and leave within the hour. One of them is 18 years old. The other is 22. Their names are recorded in the estate's discipline ledger as John Finch and Robert Hall. After their dismissal, there is no record of either of them finding employment at another country house. They disappear from the employment registers entirely. You hear about this from the estate steward, who tells you as a warning. He says, "I trust you run a decent operation here, William. I should not need to remind you that moral standards must be maintained among the staff. Any hint of impropriety, and I will have no choice but to act. Do you understand?" You say, "Yes, sir. I understand." He says, "Good. I have always found you to be a sensible man. I trust that will continue." After he leaves, you stand in your office, your hands clenched so tight your nails cut into your palms. You think about John Finch and Robert Hall. You think about how easily that could be you and Thomas. One wrong moment, one person seeing something they should not see, one accusation. That evening, you tell Thomas what happened. He listens without expression. When you finish, he says, "Do you want me to leave?" You say no. "Do you want to leave?" He says no. "But I do not want to end up like them either." You say, "Neither do I. So we are more careful. We are so careful that no one could ever prove anything even if they suspected." He says, "We are already careful." You say, "Then we are more careful than that." For the next month, Thomas does not visit your cottage. You do not visit his. You barely speak to each other outside of work discussions. You assign him to the far end of the garden. You make a point of being seen spending time with other staff members. You go to the village pub with the foreman. You accept an invitation to dinner at the estate steward's house and spend 3 excruciating hours making polite conversation with his wife. You are proving you are normal. You are proving you are safe. It is exhausting. In March, Thomas knocks on your door. It is not Sunday. It is a Tuesday evening. You open the door and he is standing there, his face pale, his hands shaking. You pull him inside. You say, "What happened?" He says, "My mother is dying. I got a letter from my sister. I need to go home. I need to leave tomorrow." You say, "Of course. Take as long as you need. Your position will be here when you return." He says, "I do not know if I will return." You feel the ground shift under you. You say, "What do you mean?" He says, "If my mother dies, my sister will need help with the younger children. My father is gone. There is no one else. I might have to stay in Warwickshire. I might have to find work there." You say, "You have work here." He says, "I know, but family is different. You understand that?" You do understand. You do not want to understand, but you do. You say, "How long will you be gone?" He says, "I do not know. A few weeks, maybe longer. I will write to you when I know more." You want to ask if you will ever see him again. You want to ask him to promise he will come back. You want to grab his arm and beg him not to leave, but you do not do any of that. You just nod and say, "I hope your mother recovers. And if she does not, I am sorry." He says, "Thank you." He leaves the next morning. You stand at the window of your cottage and watch him walk down the path toward the village, carrying a small bag with his belongings. He does not look back. You do not hear from him for 3 weeks. Then a letter arrives. It is short. His mother died 2 days after he arrived. The funeral was yesterday. He is staying in Warwickshire to help his sister. He does not know when he will be able to return. He will write again when he knows more. The letter is signed simply Thomas. You read it until you have it memorized. Then you fold it carefully and put it in the drawer of your desk, underneath the letter from Albert Trent. Spring arrives without Thomas. The garden wakes up the way it always does. Daffodils push through the soil. The fruit trees bud. The birds return, filling the mornings with noise. You go through the motions of your work. You assign tasks. You inspect the glasshouses. You order seeds. You approve expenditures. You do everything a head gardener is supposed to do. But the garden feels empty. You promote another journeyman to take Thomas's place as second foreman. His name is Edward. He is competent and reliable and completely uninteresting to you. He does his job well. You have no complaints. But when he asks you a question, you have to remind yourself to pay attention because your mind is always elsewhere. The other staff notice. The under-gardeners whisper that you have become distant. The foremen mention to each other that you no longer join them at the pub. Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper, asks if you are feeling unwell. You tell her you are fine. She does not believe you, but she does not press. You write to Thomas twice. The first letter is carefully professional. You tell him about the garden. You mention that his position is still available whenever he is ready to return. You ask, politely, how his family is managing. You do not say what you want to say, which is, "Please come back. I cannot do this without you." He replies a month later. His letter is equally professional. His sister is managing. The children are adjusting. He has found work at a small estate nearby. Nothing grand, just maintaining the grounds of a modest house owned by a retired colonel. The pay is less than what you offered, but it is enough. He does not say when he might return. He does not say if he will return. You write a second letter. This one is harder to keep professional. You start 4 different drafts and burn 3 of them. The final version says, "The garden misses you. I miss you. If you can come back, even just to visit, I would like to see you. If you cannot, I understand. But please write and tell me so I know." You send it. You wait. No reply comes. By June, you stop expecting one. The garden moves forward. It has to. The family is in residence. There are guests. There is a summer party planned for August, 200 people on the lawn, and the garden must be perfect. You throw yourself into the work. You redesign the herbaceous borders to be more dramatic. You expand the rose collection, adding 30 new varieties. You repair the fountain in the formal garden that has been broken for a decade, hiring a stonemason and a plumber. Spending money the estate steward complains about but ultimately approves. The party is a success. The guests wander through the garden, champagne glasses in hand, exclaiming over the flowers. The lady of the house tells you, in front of several important visitors, that you are a magician. You smile and thank her and feel nothing. That night, alone in your cottage, you realize you have built the career you always wanted. You are head gardener of a major estate. You are respected. You are well paid. You have security. You have achieved everything you worked toward for 15 years. And it means nothing without Thomas. You sit at your desk and write another letter. This one you do not send. You just write it because you need to say the words, even if no one will ever read them. You write, "I thought the garden was enough. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I built something beautiful enough, it would fill the space inside me that has always felt empty." But it does not. The garden is just a garden. It is soil and plants and labor. It is not a life. You were my life. I did not understand that until you were gone. I would give up this position tomorrow if it meant I could have you back. But I cannot give it up because I have nowhere else to go, and nothing else to offer you, except this garden and this title, and this lonely cottage at the edge of an estate that does not care if I live or die as long as the roses bloom on time. You fold the letter. You put it in the drawer with the others. You go to bed. In September, a young man arrives at the garden asking for work. He is 17. His name is Christopher. He has no experience, but he is willing to learn. You hire him as a garden labourer, the lowest position. He is assigned to the bothy with the other young workers. Christopher is eager, too eager. He follows you around asking questions. He volunteers for every difficult task. He stays late, working past the end of the day without being asked. The other labourers find him annoying. You find him exhausting. One evening, Christopher knocks on your cottage door. You open it, surprised. He is holding a bundle of carrots, freshly pulled from the kitchen garden. He says, "I thought you might want these." I pulled extra. You take the carrots. You say, "Thank you. Is there something you need?" He hesitates. Then he says, "I wanted to ask your advice, sir, about becoming a gardener. A real gardener, I mean. Not just a labourer." You invite him in. You are not sure why. Maybe because you are lonely. Maybe because he reminds you of yourself at that age, desperate to prove you belonged in the garden. He sits at your table. You make tea. You tell him what you tell every young man who asks: work hard, pay attention, learn from everyone, specialize in something that makes you valuable. He listens intently, nodding at everything you say. Then he says, "Were you always alone, sir?" You look at him sharply. You say, "What do you mean?" He says, "I just mean, you do not have a wife, you do not talk about family, you seem very alone. I wondered if that is just what happens when you become head gardener, if the job makes you that way." You say, carefully, "The job requires focus. It does not leave much time for other things." He says, "But you must have had friends, before, people you cared about." You realize what he is doing. He is asking without asking. He is trying to find out if you are like him. You see it in the way he looks at you, the hope and fear mixed together. He is 17 and alone and trying to find someone who understands. You say, I had a friend once. We worked together for several years. He was a good gardener, one of the best I have known. Christopher says, what happened to him? You say, he had to leave. Family obligations. I have not seen him in several months. Christopher is quiet. Then he says, do you miss him? You say, yes, very much. He nods. He seems to understand that you have said all you are going to say. He finishes his tea. He thanks you for the advice. He leaves. You do not invite him back. It is too dangerous. He is too young and too reckless and too desperate for connection. You cannot be what he needs. You can barely manage your own loneliness. You cannot take responsibility for his. But you watch him over the following weeks. You see the way he looks at one of the other young labourers, a boy named Henry, who has dark curly hair and an easy smile. You see the way Christopher engineers reasons to work near Henry. You see the way he lights up when Henry laughs at something he says. You see yourself and Thomas, 4 years ago. You pull Christopher aside one afternoon. You say, be careful. People notice more than you think. If you care about someone, you need to protect them by not making it obvious. Christopher's face goes red. He says, I do not know what you mean, sir. You say, yes, you do. Just be careful. You walk away before he can respond. That night, you think about all the young men like Christopher who have moved through gardens over the centuries. Boys who did not understand what they were yet. Boys who fell in love with other boys and had no framework for it, no language, no stories that told them they were not alone. Some of them figured it out. They found each other. They built quiet lives in the margins. They survived. Some of them did not. They married women they did not love because it was expected. They buried what they felt so deep they forgot it was there. They lived half lives, going through the motions, never quite connecting to anything. And some of them were caught. They were prosecuted. They were imprisoned. They were executed. They were erased. The garden could protect you only so far. The rest was luck. In October, you receive a letter from Albert Trent. He is retiring finally, at the age of 68. He is moving to a small cottage near the coast. He writes, I am done with gardens. I have spent 50 years on my knees in the dirt, and I am ready to spend my remaining years looking at the sea. But I wanted to write to you before I go. You reminded me, when we corresponded, of myself at your age, ambitious, dedicated, alone. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. The garden will take everything you give it and ask for more. It will fill your days and your thoughts and your dreams. It will give you purpose and satisfaction and a kind of beauty that most people never experience. But it will not love you back. Only people can do that. Do not make the mistake I made. Do not choose the garden over the person. I did. I lost Edward because I was too afraid to leave my position, too afraid to risk everything for him. He died in 1881. I was not there. I was managing a garden that does not remember me and does not care. You are young enough to make a different choice. If there is someone you love, fight for them. The garden will still be here tomorrow. The person might not be. You read the letter sitting at your desk. Then you read it again. Then you fold it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the others. You think about what Trent said. You think about Thomas. You think about the choice you made, the choice to stay here, to keep this position, to build this career. You think about whether it was the right choice. You do not have an answer. Winter comes. The third winter since you became head gardener. The estate holds its Christmas dinner. You sit at the head table. You sing the carols. You accept compliments on the garden from staff members who are required to compliment you. You smile and nod and feel like you are watching yourself from a great distance. After the dinner, You walk back to your cottage alone. The path is frozen. Your breath mists in the air. The garden is silent, locked in cold, waiting for spring. You reach your cottage. You go inside. You light the fire. You sit in the chair by the hearth and stare at the flames. There is a knock at the door. You are not expecting anyone. It is late. It is Christmas Eve. Everyone else is in their quarters, sleeping off too much ale and roast beef. You open the door. Thomas is standing there. He is thinner than you remember. His face is weathered. He looks exhausted. He is holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He says, "I brought bread and honey. I thought you might be hungry." You cannot speak. You just stand there, staring at him, trying to convince yourself he is real. He says, "Can I come in?" You step aside. He walks into the cottage. You close the door. You turn to face him. He sets the bundle on the table. He says, "My sister remarried. A farmer from the next village. He is a good man. He can take care of her and the children. She does not need me anymore." You say, "When did you get back?" He says, "This afternoon. I went to the bothy first. They told me I should report to the head gardener. So here I am, reporting." You say, "Your position is still open, if you want it." He says, "I want it." You say, "Why did you not write?" "I sent 3 letters. You only replied once." He looks down. He says, "I did not know what to say. I thought maybe it would be easier if I just stayed away, if I let you move on, if I built a different life. But I could not. I tried. I thought about you every day. I thought about this garden. I thought about the life we had. And I realized I would rather have that, with all the fear and the hiding and the risk, than have anything else." You cross the room. You take his face in your hands. You say, "Do not leave again." He says, "I will not." You kiss him. It is not gentle. It is desperate and fierce and full of all the months of silence and loneliness and fear that you could not say in letters. When you finally pull apart, he says, "I missed you." You say, "I missed you too." That night, Thomas stays, not in his own cottage, in yours. You do not care anymore if someone sees. You do not care if someone reports you. You do not care about anything except the fact that he is here, solid and real and warm beside you. In the morning, you will go back to being careful. You will go back to the delicate dance of hiding in plain sight. But tonight, you let yourself have this. Thomas returns to work in January. You promote him to foreman immediately. The estate steward questions the timing. You tell him Thomas is the most qualified man for the position. The steward accepts this because the garden runs smoothly and you have never given him reason to doubt your judgment. The other staff accept it too. Thomas has been here for years. He is skilled. He is reliable. No one objects. What they do not see is that Thomas moves back into the cottage next to yours. They do not see that he visits on Sunday evenings and does not leave until late. They do not see the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. Or maybe they do see. Maybe the undergardener named Christopher sees, and it gives him hope. Maybe the old foreman Samuel sees, and it reminds him of Laurent, the French gardener from Windsor he never talks about. Maybe even Mrs. Dawson sees, and chooses to say nothing because the garden is beautiful and you are good at your job, and what you do in your private time is not her concern. The garden keeps its secrets. It always has. You and Thomas fall into a new routine. It is not perfect. You still have to be careful. You still have to maintain the appearance of propriety. But it is something. It is more than you had when he was gone. On Sundays, he comes to your cottage. You cook simple meals together. You sit by the fire. Sometimes you read to him from the poetry book he gave you years ago. Sometimes you just sit in silence, his head on your shoulder, your hand in his hair. You do not talk about the future. The future is uncertain. The law is still the law. The risk is still the risk. At any moment, everything could be taken away. But you have now. You have Sunday evenings. You have stolen moments in the orchard when no one is watching. You have the cottage wall between you at night, thin enough that you can hear him breathing on the other side. It is not what you would choose if you could choose anything, but it is what you have, and it is enough. The historian Matt Holbrook, writing about the hidden lives of queer men in early 20th century England, found that most long-term relationships were sustained by exactly this kind of routine. Regularly scheduled visits that could be explained away as friendship. Shared work that justified time spent together. Physical proximity that allowed for brief moments of intimacy stolen between the cracks of daily life. These relationships were not dramatic. They were not grand romances. They were quiet and persistent and endlessly negotiated. They required constant vigilance, constant care, constant awareness of who was watching and who might talk. But they endured. Some of them lasted decades. The men grew old together in their separate cottages, visiting each other every Sunday until one of them died. And then the survivor would continue alone, carrying the memory of what they had built, telling no one. In the spring of 1891, the estate hosts a visit from a prominent horticulturalist. His name is William Robinson. He is famous for his writing on natural gardening, his rejection of formal Victorian bedding schemes in favour of herbaceous borders and wild gardens. He has written books that every gardener in England has read. He is touring estates to gather material for his next publication. You are terrified. Robinson is known for his critical eye. If he disapproves of your garden, his opinion will spread through the horticultural world. Your reputation will suffer. The family will question your competence. But Robinson arrives, and he is charmed. He spends 3 days walking the garden with you, asking questions, taking notes. He praises your herbaceous borders. He admires the way you have integrated the kitchen garden with the ornamental grounds. He spends an hour in the orchard, examining your espalier technique, and declares it some of the finest work he has seen. On his last evening, he joins you for dinner in your cottage. Thomas is there too. You introduced him as your foreman. Robinson does not question why your foreman is dining with you. Perhaps he assumes this is normal. Perhaps he does not care. Over dinner, Robinson tells stories about the gardens he has visited, the gardeners he has known. He talks about a head gardener in Scotland who built an entire alpine garden by hauling rocks up a mountainside for 10 years. He talks about a gardener in Ireland who specialised in rare orchids and bankrupted his employer importing specimens from the tropics. He talks about a pair of gardeners in Wales who worked together for 40 years and were buried side by side in the estate churchyard. He says this last story casually, as if it is simply an interesting fact. But the way he says it, the way he glances at you and Thomas as he says it, makes you think he knows, or suspects, or simply does not care. After Robinson leaves, Thomas says, "Do you think he knew?" You say, "Maybe." Does it matter? Thomas thinks about this. Then he says, "No, I suppose it does not." And it does not, because Robinson is leaving. He will write about your garden in glowing terms, which he does, publishing a feature in the Garden magazine in June of 1891 that brings visitors from across England to see your herbaceous borders. But he will not write about you and Thomas. He will not mention the foreman who dined with the head gardener. He will not say anything about what he might have seen or suspected. He will keep your secret because it is not his story to tell. Summer passes, autumn, winter, another year. The garden cycles through its seasons. You cycle with it. You are 32 now. Thomas is 29. You have been together, in some form, for 6 years. You have been hiding for 6 years. You have been careful for 6 years. You are tired of being careful. One evening in February, you say to Thomas, "What if we left?" He looks up from the book he is reading. He says, "Left where?" You say, "Here, this estate, England. What if we went somewhere else, somewhere we did not have to hide?" He says, "Where would we go?" You say, "I do not know. America, maybe. Or France. Somewhere the laws are different. Somewhere we could just live. Thomas is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "And do what? We are gardeners. That is all we know. We would need to find work. We would need references. We would need money to travel, money to live on, until we found positions." You say, "I have been saving. I have almost £100. That is enough to get us to America and live for 6 months while we find work." He says, "You have been saving. For us." You say, "Yes." He stands, he paces to the window. He looks out at the dark garden. He says, "What if we get there and it is not any better? What if the laws are different but the people are the same? What if we leave everything behind and it turns out there is nowhere we can just live?" You say, "Then at least we tried. At least we chose something instead of just accepting what we were given." He turns to face you. He says, "What about the garden? You have built something here. You are respected. You have a future. If we leave, you lose all of that." You say, "I know." He says, "And you would give it up? For this? For me?" You say, "Yes," without question. "Yes." Thomas crosses the room. He sits down next to you. He takes your hand. He says, "I need to think about it." You say, "Take all the time you need." But you already know his answer. You can see it in his eyes. He is afraid. And you do not blame him. You are afraid too. Leaving is a dream. Staying is reality. And reality, for all its limitations, is at least familiar. Thomas does not bring up leaving again. Neither do you. The conversation sits between you like an unopened letter. Some mornings you wake up convinced you should push harder, make plans, book passage to New York or Boston. Other mornings, you look at the garden in the early light and cannot imagine walking away. The garden is yours in a way nothing else has ever been. Every tree you pruned, every border you planted, every wall you repaired. 15 years of your life are written into this soil. If you leave, someone else will take over. They will change things. They will rip out your borders and plant their own. In 10 years, there will be no trace of you left. That should not matter. But it does. March brings unexpected news. The estate is being sold. The family has accumulated debts. The master of the house made poor investments. They are moving to a smaller property in Oxfordshire. The sale will be finalised by September. The new owner, a banker from London named Harrison, will take possession in October. The estate steward calls you into his office. He tells you that your position is not guaranteed under the new ownership. Mr. Harrison will bring his own steward. That steward will decide whether to retain the current staff or hire new people. You should prepare yourself for the possibility of dismissal. You ask what happens to the garden in the interim. The steward says you are to maintain it through the summer so it looks presentable for the sale. After that, it is not your concern. You walk out of that meeting and straight to the orchard where Thomas is working. You tell him. He listens. Then he says, "So we are leaving whether we choose to or not." You say, "It seems that way." He says, "Do you think the new owner will keep us?" You say, "I do not know. Maybe, if we are lucky. But luck has not been our strong suit." Thomas puts down his pruning saw. He sits on the low stone wall that runs along the orchard edge. He says, "Where will we go?" You sit next to him. You say, "We could try another estate. Together. We could write to head gardeners we know, ask if they need a foreman and a second. We could stay in England, just move somewhere else." He says, "Or we could leave, like you said, America, France, somewhere new." You look at him, you say, "You have been thinking about it." He says, "I have not been thinking about much else." You say, "And?" He says, "I am afraid. I am afraid of leaving. I am afraid of staying. I am afraid that no matter what we choose, it will be wrong. But I am more afraid of losing you. So if leaving is what keeps us together, then that is what we should do." You feel something shift in your chest. You say, "We do not have to decide today." He says, "When do we have to decide?" You say, "Soon. Before the sale is final. Before we lose the chance." He nods. He picks up his saw. He goes back to work. You sit on the wall and watch him for a long time, memorizing the shape of him against the bare apple trees. The next few months are strange. You continue managing the garden, knowing it might not be yours much longer. You train the undergardeners. You order supplies. You plan the summer planting. You do everything exactly as you would if nothing were changing. But everything is changing. The family begins packing. Furniture is loaded into carts. Paintings are taken down from the walls. The house starts to look hollow, echoes bouncing off empty rooms. The indoor staff is dismissed in stages. The butler leaves in May, the housekeeper in June. By July, only a skeleton crew remains. The garden staff stays. You are needed until the sale is complete. But the atmosphere shifts. The men know their jobs are temporary. Some of them start looking for other positions. Frederick, the journeyman who has been here for 12 years, gives notice in June. He has found work at an estate in Hampshire. He leaves at the end of the month. Christopher, the young labourer you warned to be careful, leaves too. He does not give a reason. He just packs his belongings one morning and disappears. You hear later from one of the other labourers that Christopher and Henry, the boy he had been infatuated with, left together. They told people they were going to London to find factory work. You hope that is true. You hope they make it. You hope they are smarter than you were at that age. By August, the garden staff has shrunk from 31 to 18. You do your best with who remains. The garden is still beautiful. The roses are in their second flush of bloom. The herbaceous borders are at their peak. The lawns are immaculate. When potential buyers visit, they walk the grounds and nod approvingly. The garden is an asset. It increases the property's value. You have made yourself useful. You have made yourself dispensable. One afternoon, Thomas finds you sitting in the folly. You have been avoiding the folly for months. Too many memories. But today you walked here without thinking, and now you are sitting on the stone bench where you kissed him for the second time, 7 years ago. He sits next to you. He does not say anything. He just sits. You say, "I wrote to 3 head gardeners, 1 in Scotland, 1 in Northumberland, 1 in Devon. I asked if they needed experienced staff. I have not heard back from any of them." Thomas says, "Maybe they do not need anyone. Or maybe they heard about the sale and they are waiting to see what happens," you say. Or maybe they know about us. Maybe someone said something and the word has spread and now no one will hire us. Thomas says, "You do not know that." You say, "I do not know anything anymore. I do not know where we will be in 2 months. I do not know if we will be together. I do not know if this was all for nothing." Thomas takes your hand. Right there in the folly, in the middle of the afternoon, where anyone could walk past and see. He says, "It was not for nothing. We had 7 years. That is more than most people like us ever get. If it ends tomorrow, we still had that." You say, "I do not want it to end tomorrow." He says, "Neither do I." So we make sure it does not. He pulls a piece of paper from his pocket. He unfolds it. He hands it to you. It is a ship's passage receipt. 2 tickets to New York. Departure date, October 15th. You stare at the receipt. You say, "When did you do this?" He says, "Last week. I used my savings. It is not much, but it is enough to get us there. You said you have £100. That will keep us going until we find work." You say, "You bought tickets without telling me." He says, "I bought tickets because you have been trying to convince yourself to stay. And I know you. You will convince yourself. You will decide the risk is too great, or the garden is too important, or we should wait and see what the new owner says. You will find a reason. So I removed the option. We are leaving. The decision is made." You look at him. You say, "What if I do not want to go?" He says, "Then I will go alone." and you will stay here and build another garden for another family, and you will be alone for the rest of your life. Is that what you want? You say no. He says, then we are leaving. You fold the receipt. You put it in your pocket. You say, October 15th. He says, October 15th. You sit in the folly together, holding hands, listening to the wind move through the oak trees. The garden stretches out around you, beautiful and indifferent. It does not care if you leave. It will bloom next spring, whether you are here or not. For the first time, that feels like permission. The sale is finalized in September. Mr. Harrison, the new owner, visits the estate for the first time on September 12th. He is a tall, thin man in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard, and the kind of precise way of speaking that suggests he counts every word before releasing it. He tours the house with his steward. Then he tours the garden with you. You walk him through the ornamental grounds first, the herbaceous borders, the rose garden, the formal terraces. He nods but does not comment. Then you take him to the kitchen gardens, the glass houses, the fruit walls, the vegetable plots. Here he stops. He examines the espalier peaches. He asks how old the trees are. You tell him. He asks about yield. You tell him. He asks about your methods for pest control, for pruning, for winter protection. You answer every question in detail. Finally, he says, you know what you are doing. You say, I have been doing it for 16 years, sir. He says, I am keeping you on, and your foreman. The rest of the staff I will evaluate over the next month. But you two stay. I need people who understand this garden. You should feel relieved. You should feel grateful. This is exactly what you hoped for when you first heard about the sale. Instead, you feel trapped. You say, thank you, sir. That is very generous. He says, I expect the garden to be maintained to the same standard I see today. Can you do that? You say, yes, sir. He nods. He walks away. You stand in the kitchen garden, surrounded by espaliered pears and runner beans climbing their frames, and you think about the receipt in your desk drawer. October 15th, 3 weeks away. That evening, you tell Thomas. He listens. Then he says, so we are staying. You say, I did not say that. He says, you do not have to. I can see it in your face. He offered you the position. You want to take it. You say, I do not know what I want. Thomas stands. He walks to the door. He says, I know what I want. I want to leave. I want to go to America. I want to build a life where we do not have to hide. If you want that too, we leave on October 15th. If you do not, I leave on October 15th and you stay here. But I am done waiting. He leaves. The cottage feels enormously empty. You do not sleep that night. You lie in bed and run through every possible future. You stay here. You keep your position. Thomas leaves. You are alone, but secure. You wake up every morning and manage this garden for a man you do not know, building beauty you do not own, and every Sunday you sit in your cottage by yourself and remember what it felt like when Thomas was there. Or you leave. You go to America with no job and no prospects. You start over in a country you have never seen. Maybe you find work. Maybe you do not. Maybe the laws are better there. Maybe they are not. Maybe you and Thomas build something that lasts. Maybe you lose each other anyway in a new city where you know no one. Both futures are uncertain. Both are frightening. But only one of them has Thomas in it. In the morning, you walk to the estate steward's office. The new steward is a man named Peters. You have met him once. He is efficient and cold and uninterested in pleasantries. You say, I need to resign my position. He looks up from his paperwork. He says, I beg your pardon. You say, I am resigning, effective October 14th. I apologize for the short notice, but I have been offered another position and I need to take it. This is a lie. You have not been offered anything. But Peters does not know that. He says, Mr. Harrison specifically asked me to retain you. He was quite insistent. You say, I understand, but I have made my decision. Peter stares at you. He says, you are making a mistake. Positions like this do not come along often, especially for men without references. You say, I have references. 16 years of work. The garden speaks for itself. He says, the garden will speak for someone else now. I will have your replacement within a fortnight. You say, I am certain you will. You leave before he can argue further. You walk straight to the foreman's cottage. You knock. Thomas opens the door. You say, October 15th. He says, you are sure. You say, I am terrified, but I am sure. He smiles. It is the first real smile you have seen from him in weeks. He says, we should start packing. You have very little to pack. 16 years of life reduced to 2 small trunks, clothes, a few books, tools that belong to you and not the estate. The letters from Albert Trent, from Thomas, from your sister who writes once a year to tell you about her children. A small wooden box that belonged to your mother. That is all. Thomas has even less. 1 trunk. He jokes that he is travelling light. You do not laugh. You are too aware of what you are leaving behind. The head gardener of an estate in Surrey writes back to your earlier inquiry. He says he does have an opening for an experienced foreman. If you are still interested, he would be happy to arrange an interview. The letter arrives on October 3rd. You read it twice. Then you burn it in the fireplace. You spend your final week training your replacement. His name is John Ashworth. He is 42. He has worked at smaller estates for 20 years, and this is his first position as head gardener. He is competent, but unimaginative. He walks the garden with you, taking notes, asking questions that reveal he does not really understand the work. He wants to rip out the herbaceous borders and replace them with formal bedding. He wants to cut down the old apple trees in the orchard and plant new ones in straight rows. You do not argue. It is not your garden anymore. On your last day, you walk the grounds alone. You start at the walled garden. The fruit trees you trained are still there. Branches spread against the brick like open hands. The glasshouses are warm and full of light. The rose garden is fading now. October blooms smaller and paler than summer, but still beautiful. The ornamental lake reflects the sky. The folly sits half hidden in the trees. You memorize all of it. You will never see it again. That night, Thomas comes to your cottage. You sit together by the fire. Neither of you speaks. There is nothing left to say. Tomorrow you leave. Tomorrow you walk away from the only life you have ever known. Tomorrow you step off solid ground and hope you land somewhere safe. Thomas falls asleep in your arms. You stay awake, listening to him breathe, feeling the weight of him against your chest. You think about the 17-year-old boy you were when you first walked into a garden. You think about everything you have learned since then. You think about the men who came before you, the gardeners who loved each other in secret and left no record except whispers and suspicions and the occasional letter that survived the fire. You think about Albert Trent's words. Do not make the mistake I made. Do not choose the garden over the person. You chose the person. You hope it was the right choice. The ship is called the Germanic. It is a White Star Line steamer, built for transatlantic passenger service. You and Thomas board on the morning of October 15th, 1892. The dock is chaos. Hundreds of people pushing toward the gangway, carrying trunks and bags and children. The smell of salt water and coal smoke and unwashed bodies is overwhelming. You have booked 2 second-class berths. Not the cheapest steerage accommodation, where passengers are packed like cargo, but not first class either. Second class means a small cabin with 2 narrow bunks, shared washrooms, a dining saloon where you will eat meals at assigned times. It is austere, but tolerable. The steward who shows you to your cabin assumes you are travelling companions, friends or colleagues. He does not question why 2 men are sharing a room. This is normal for second class. Travelling alone is expensive. Most men travelling for work share accommodations. Your cabin is tiny. 2 bunks, a washstand, a single porthole looking out at grey water. You set your trunk on the floor. Thomas sets his trunk on the floor. You both stand there, awkward in the confined space. Thomas says, "We did it." You say, "We did." He says, "Are you all right?" You say, "Ask me when we get there." The ship departs at noon. You stand on deck with Thomas and watch England recede. The coast becomes a dark line, then a smudge, then nothing, just water in every direction. The wind is cold, the sky is the colour of slate. Thomas stands close enough that his shoulder presses against yours. He says, "No going back now." You say no. He says, "Good." The crossing takes 8 days. The weather is rough. Half the passengers are seasick. Thomas is one of them. He spends the first 3 days lying in his bunk, pale and miserable, unable to keep anything down. You bring him weak tea and dry biscuit from the dining saloon. You sit with him. You read to him from the poetry book. He does not complain, but you can see the misery in his eyes. On the 4th day, the sea calms. Thomas is able to stand. He comes up on deck with you. The air is cold and clean. You stand at the rail and watch the ocean slide past, endless and grey and indifferent. Thomas says, "What do we do when we get there?" You say, "We find a place to stay, somewhere cheap. Then we find work." He says, "Doing what?" You say, "What we have always done. Gardens." He says, "Do they have estates in America like the ones in England?" You say, "I do not know. But they have gardens. Everywhere has gardens. Someone has to take care of them." He nods. He does not look convinced. Neither are you. That night, lying in your bunk, you hear Thomas crying softly in the bunk above you. You do not say anything. You just reach up and put your hand on the edge of his mattress. After a moment, his hand finds yours. You lie like that until he falls asleep. You arrive in New York on October 23rd. The ship docks at a pier on the Hudson River. The city rises up in front of you, enormous and chaotic and nothing like anything you have ever seen. Buildings taller than you thought buildings could be. Streets packed with people and carts and noise. The smell of garbage and smoke and something sweet you cannot identify. You and Thomas collect your trunks. You go through the immigration inspection at Castle Garden. A board official asks your names, your ages, your occupations. You say, "Gardeners." He writes it down. He stamps your papers. He waves you through. You walk out into the city. You have £123, which converts to just under $600. It seems like a fortune. It will not last long. You find a boarding house in the Bowery. The landlady is Irish. She rents you a room on the 3rd floor for $2 a week. The room is smaller than your cabin on the ship. 1 bed, a chair, a cracked wash basin. The window looks out at a brick wall. Thomas sets his trunk down. He sits on the bed. He says, "Well, here we are." You say, "Here we are." He says, "Now what?" You say, "Now we find work." You spend the next 2 weeks walking the city. You ask at every park, every public garden, every wealthy neighbourhood where you see someone tending a yard. You explain that you are experienced gardeners from England. You have references. You know horticulture. You are willing to work hard. Most people turn you away. Some do not even let you finish speaking. One man tells you they do not hire Englishmen because they are arrogant. Another tells you he only hires Italians. A third tells you he already has a gardener and does not need another. By the end of November, you have spent $40 on rent and food, and you have not found work. You are starting to panic. Then, on a cold morning in early December, you meet a man named Frederick Law Olmsted. You do not know who he is at first. You are walking through Central Park, which is still under construction, trying to find the site supervisor to ask about work. You see an older man standing near the lake, looking at a stand of newly planted trees. He is maybe 60 years old, grey-haired, well-dressed. He is frowning at the trees like they have personally offended him. You approach. You say, "Excuse me, sir. I am looking for the site supervisor." He says, without looking at you, the site supervisor is an idiot. These trees are planted too deep. The root flare should be visible. Whoever did this does not know what they are doing. You look at the trees. He is right. The soil is mounded around the trunks, which will cause rot. You say, "They should be lifted and replanted." Now he looks at you. He says, "You know trees." You say, I was a head gardener. In England. I know trees. He studies you for a long moment. Then he says, Frederick Olmsted. I designed this park. I am trying to keep incompetent contractors from destroying it. Who are you? You tell him your name. You tell him you are looking for work. You tell him you have 16 years of experience managing large estates. Olmsted listens. When you finish, he says, I need someone who understands naturalistic planting. Someone who can manage a crew. Someone who will not bury trees up to their necks because they think it looks tidier. Can you do that? You say yes. He says, there is a project in Brooklyn, Prospect Park. We are building it now. I need a foreman who knows what he is doing. The pay is $60 a month. You start Monday. You stand there, stunned. You say, I have a colleague. He is also experienced. Could you use both of us? Olmsted considers. He says, bring him tomorrow. If he knows half what you know, I will hire him. You bring Thomas the next day. Olmsted asks him 3 questions about soil drainage. Thomas answers all of them correctly. Olmsted hires him on the spot. You start work the following Monday. Prospect Park is raw land being transformed. Hills are being built. Lakes are being dug. Thousands of trees are being planted. It is chaos. It is grueling work. It is the most exciting thing you have ever been part of. You and Thomas work side by side. No one questions it. No one cares. You are just 2 foremen among dozens. You manage crews of Irish and Italian labourers who barely speak English but understand dirt and shovels and hard work. You plant oak trees and maples and elms. You build stone walls and wooden bridges. You shape the land into something beautiful. At night, you go back to the boarding house. You and Thomas share the single bed because there is no reason not to. The landlady does not care. The other boarders do not care. No one is watching. No one is policing. You are invisible in the best possible way. One night in February, Thomas says, we should get our own place. Somewhere with more space. You say, we cannot afford it yet. He says, we will be able to soon. We are both earning now. We could rent a small house, somewhere in Brooklyn, near the park. You say, a house, for the 2 of us. He says, why not? People will assume we are sharing rent, colleagues, friends. No one will question it. You think about this. A house, not a cottage on someone else's estate, not a room in a boarding house, a house that belongs to you, or at least that you rent with your own money earned by your own labour. You say, all right, let us find a house. You find a small row house in Park Slope in March of 1893. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlour, a tiny yard in the back. The rent is $18 a month, which is steep, but you can manage it. You move in on a Saturday. You have bought almost no furniture. 2 beds, though you only sleep in one. A table, 4 chairs, some dishes. That is all. The house feels empty, but it feels like yours. That first night, you and Thomas sit at the table and eat bread and cheese, the same meal you have eaten 1,000 times. But this time, it is different. This time, you are sitting in your own house. This time, there is no head gardener who might walk in, no estate steward, no family, no one. Thomas says, we did it. You say, we did. He says, are you happy? You think about this. Happy feels like too small a word for what you are feeling. You are exhausted and uncertain and still half convinced this will all be taken away. But you are also here, in this house, with this man, building something that belongs only to the 2 of you. You say, yes, I am happy. The years that follow are not easy. The financial panic of 1893 hits hard. Work slows. Olmsted's projects are delayed. You and Thomas are laid off for 3 months. You survive on your savings, which dwindle frighteningly fast. You take temporary work where you can find it. Thomas works for a landscaping company in Manhattan. You take a job maintaining the grounds of a private estate in Queens. But you survive. You always find work eventually. Gardens need tending. Someone has to do it. By 1895, the economy recovers. Olmsted's projects resume. You are rehired at Prospect Park. Thomas is hired as head gardener for a wealthy family in Brooklyn Heights. You are both secure again. You settle into a routine. You work. You come home. You eat dinner together. On Sundays, you work in your small backyard, planting vegetables and flowers. The yard is tiny, but it is yours. You grow tomatoes and beans and herbs. Thomas plants roses along the back fence. They bloom every June, deep red and fragrant. Your neighbours assume you are brothers or cousins or colleagues. No one asks directly. You do not offer explanations. You are simply two men who live together, which is not unusual. Plenty of working men share housing to save money. What your neighbours do not see is what happens behind closed doors. They do not see the way Thomas rests his head on your shoulder while you read the newspaper in the evening. They do not see the way you reach for his hand across the table. They do not see the life you have built in the quiet spaces between the public and the private. In 1898, Thomas's health begins to fail. It starts small, a persistent cough, fatigue. He dismisses it as a bad cold. But the cough does not go away. By autumn, he is losing weight. By winter, he can barely make it through a full day of work. You take him to a doctor. The doctor examines him. He says it is consumption, tuberculosis. There is no cure. Rest might help. Fresh air. Good food. But most people do not recover. You ask how long. The doctor says it depends. Months. Maybe a year. Maybe less. You take Thomas home. You put him to bed. You sit beside him and hold his hand and try to think of something to say. He says, "I am sorry." You say, do not apologize. He says, "We were supposed to have more time." You say, "We have time now. We have today. We have tomorrow. We have however long we have." He closes his eyes. He says, "I am glad we left. I am glad we came here. I am glad we had this." You say, "So am I." Thomas works as long as he can. He keeps going to the estate in Brooklyn Heights until December, when he collapses in the rose garden he planted 3 years ago. You bring him home. He does not go back. You take a leave from Prospect Park. You tell them it is a family emergency, which is true even if they do not understand what kind of family. You stay home and care for Thomas. You make him meals he cannot eat. You sit with him while he sleeps. You read to him when he is awake. You watch him fade, slowly, over the course of months. In April of 1899, on a warm spring evening, Thomas dies. He is 37 years old. You are holding his hand when it happens. One moment he is breathing, the next he is not. It is quiet. There is no drama. He simply stops. You sit with him for a long time. The room grows dark. You do not light the lamp. You just sit there, holding the hand of the man you have loved for 13 years, and try to understand that he is gone. The funeral is small. You are the only mourner. You bury him in Greenwood Cemetery under a plain headstone that reads, "Thomas Whitfield, 1861-1899, beloved friend." The words feel inadequate, but you do not know what else to put. You cannot write what you want to write. You cannot say he was my partner, my love, my entire life. So you write beloved friend and hope that someday someone will understand what that meant. You go back to work. You throw yourself into it. You work 12-hour days. You take every extra project Olmsted offers. You redesign sections of Prospect Park. You consult on private estates. You build gardens for other people because you cannot bear to be in your own house with its empty second bedroom and the roses Thomas planted that bloom every June without him. The years pass. You grow older. Your hair turns grey. Your hands develop arthritis. You are slower than you used to be, but you are still good at what you do. You work into your 60s, then your 70s. You become the old man that younger gardeners come to for advice. In 1920, you retire. You are 72 years old. You have worked in gardens for 56 years. You have lived in the house in Park Slope for 27 years. You have been alone for 21 of them. You spend your retirement tending your small backyard. The roses Thomas planted are still there, old and gnarled, but still blooming every summer. You prune them carefully. You feed them. You water them. You talk to them sometimes when no one is listening. You tell them about your day. You tell them you miss him. In 1923, you receive a letter. It is from England, from a man named Peter Ashford, the grandson of Richard Ashford, the head gardener who trained you and recommended you for promotion all those years ago. Peter writes that he is researching his grandfather's life. He found your name in Richard's journals. He found references to you and Thomas. He is writing to ask if you would be willing to share your memories. You write back. You tell him everything. You tell him about the bothy and the walled garden and the folly by the lake. You tell him about the years of hiding and the decision to leave. You tell him about New York and the house in Park Slope and Thomas's roses. You tell him about love that had to live in margins, but was no less real for it. Peter writes back. He thanks you. He says his grandfather wrote about you in his private journals with great affection. He called you one of the finest gardeners he ever trained and one of the bravest men he ever knew. Richard knew about you and Thomas. He knew, and he protected you as much as he could. You read that letter sitting in your backyard, surrounded by Thomas's roses. You are 85 years old. You have outlived everyone you knew in England. You have outlived everyone you knew in those early years in America. You are the last one left who remembers. But someone asked. Someone wanted to know. Someone thought your story mattered. You die in 1926, at the age of 78. You are buried next to Thomas in Greenwood Cemetery. Your headstone reads, William Cresswell, 1851-1926, head gardener, beloved friend. The house in Park Slope is sold. The new owners rip out the old roses and plant a modern garden. Within 5 years, there is no trace that you and Thomas ever lived there, but the gardens you built remain. The sections of Prospect Park you designed are still there. The trees you planted are tall now, shading paths where thousands of people walk every year. The estates you worked on in Queens and Brooklyn still have your herbaceous borders, replanted many times, but following your original design. You left your mark. Not in records or monuments, not in headlines or history books, but in the living, growing, blooming world. The garden remembers even when the gardener is forgotten. This is what we lose when we do not tell these stories. We lose the men who built beauty in secret. We lose the partnerships that sustained them. We lose the quiet courage it took to love someone when the law said that love was a crime. William and Thomas were not unique. They were part of a pattern that repeated across centuries and continents. Two men working together, living together, growing old together, building something in the spaces that power and law and society overlooked. Most of them left no record. Their names are lost. Their stories are lost. All that remains are gardens they planted, trees they pruned, walls they built, beauty they created for other people while hiding their own lives. But some traces survive. Letters tucked into archives, headstones placed side by side, employment records that show two names appearing together across multiple estates. Quietly, if you know where to look, the pattern emerges. The garden historian Michael Tooley found dozens of these partnerships while researching Victorian estate records. Men who worked together for decades. Men who were buried in the same churchyard. Men who left their savings to each other in wills that carefully used the language of friendship. The historian Harry Cox found court records from sodomy trials that mentioned gardeners and groundskeepers with surprising frequency. Men caught together in tool sheds, in bothies, in the hidden corners of ornamental grounds. Some were prosecuted, some were quietly dismissed. All were erased. And the historian Matt Cook found census records showing unmarried male gardeners living together well into old age, listed as lodgers or companions, or simply residents of the same address. Invisible households, invisible families. These men existed. They loved. They built lives together under conditions that would have broken most people. They deserve to be remembered. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think about the gardens you have walked through, the parks and estates and public grounds. Think about who built them. Think about the men on their knees in the dirt, planting bulbs that would bloom long after they were gone. Think about the hidden lives and secret loves and quiet acts of defiance that shaped the landscape you walk through without thinking. The garden looks permanent. It looks natural. It looks like it has always been there. But every tree was planted by someone. Every border was designed by someone. Every wall was built by someone's hands. And some of those hands belonged to men who loved each other. Men who found safety in the walled garden and the distant orchard and the folly by the lake. Men who built beauty for the world while hiding their own hearts. William and Thomas were real. Not with those exact names, perhaps. But men like them worked at Chatsworth and Blenheim and Stowe and Castle Howard and hundreds of other estates. They lived in bothies. They became foremen. They grew old together in cottages separated by a single wall. They were buried side by side under headstones that called them friends. They were not friends. They were more than that. And they knew it. And now you know it too. If this story stayed with you, the like button helps the channel reach others who would love it too. May your dreams be free of early morning bells, freezing bothies, and gardens that demand perfection while offering nothing in return. May you wake in a world where you can love openly, where your partnerships are honoured, where your labour builds something that belongs to you. May you tend your own garden. May you share it with someone who matters. May you bloom unapologetically in the light. Good night and sleep well.